RevOpsAF, the only podcast for people who are RevOpsAF and want to learn all about things that are RevOpsAF.
Our goal is to give the revenue operations community, that includes marketing, sales, and CS, for any of you not paying attention, the skills needed to accelerate their careers. Hello and welcome to RevOpsAF, the podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Camela Thompson, and I am joined today by Irwin Hipsman. Irwin, tell us a little bit about your background and why you're here.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm a Boston guy, so pros and cons of that. I've been in B2B SaaS my entire career. I started running public access cable TV stations in the Boston area and then pivoted to the for-profit sector and have worked for B2B SaaS ever since. So I started with video conferencing, social media analytics, on-demand PowerPoint presentations with voice, all these different companies. One theme throughout has been B2B SaaS. I've done sales, customer success, and the past 4 companies I've been at, I've been involved in customer marketing.
Awesome. Perfect segue into our topic. We're going to be talking about customer data and a recent survey you did. So I would love to know, what are you finding? What's jumping out at you? What's surprising?
Well, let me start with a little bit of a preface. So in the customer marketing world, there are basically 2 flavors. Flavor 1 is traditional customer advocacy community, references, renewals, case studies, videos. And that's probably about 80% of the people who have a customer marketing title are doing advocacy. Then there's about 20% of us who are customer lifecycle marketers under the customer marketing umbrella. And we're concerned with things like data, cross-sell, in-app messaging, segmentation, one-to-many, as opposed to customer advocacy, which is much more one-to-one relationship driven. So when I was in customer advocacy, I made friends with customers. When I pivoted to customer marketing, I'm more like a demand gen person, and I don't really get those relationships with customers. But having spent all this time having relationships with customers, I knew customers pretty intuitively, so I could be a very good customer marketer because I understand the language that the customers use.
Yeah, I moved from operations over to marketing, but what I found so interesting about marketing in tiny startups is you could be primarily focused on demand generation, but also be responsible for a lot of the customer marketing components.
Exactly, yeah.
And customer interviews are my favorite, but
yeah.
I digress.
I love doing that. User groups are my favorite. I love customer user groups. That's my favorite thing to do.
Yeah, when they can feed off each other and you get all the good details.
Yeah, it's great.
Good. It's good. So,
but getting to the data, the RevOps Co-op and Open Prize came out with its research on 2025 state of go-to-market data quality. I've been in the middle of the first of its kind research into the health and quality of the B2B customer contact database. Most surveys, including yours, combine the two, prospect, customer, generally the same, but some real differences, particularly the customers, because they're customers, and the data should be a lot better when it comes to customers. There was one question that sort of overlapped between the two, which was interesting. I asked people, how do you assess the cleanliness, usability, and health and trust in the customer contact database? So are people confident in it? Do they trust it? Do you think it's useful? How clean do you think it is? And asked people on a scale of 1 to 7, and when you do the math, it was a 3.3 out of 7, which is a 47%. 43% said it was good enough, and 53% said it needs improvement, and that aligned really well with the RevOps Co-op survey. And can you talk a little bit about the numbers you saw? The good news is they were in alignment, so I think we're both singing from the same book, so to speak.
It's interesting. It depends on the granularity and what you're looking at. So we saw something very similar when it came to how many people thought it was good enough. Only 11% said excellent. I think around the same percentage said good enough. But when we looked at the population of people saying, yeah, my data's good enough, 71% still struggled to make strategic decisions and with go-to-market execution. So the big question was, is it really good enough? And I would argue, no, probably not.
So other data gets a little bit better from that. 54% graded their, gave themselves a grade for their maturity, their segmentation. We'll talk a little bit more about segmentation because there are some interesting paths to take. 60% said there was cooperation and coordination amongst the groups, customer success, RevOps, customer marketing. None of these are great scores, but at least it gets a little bit better. And then 67%, a question I think is really critical because this is speaking to, frankly, job insurance, is can you get emergency communications out the door in the same business day? And the last piece of data, it was one that's near and dear to my heart because it really speaks to an insurance policy for your job. If the CEO of your company said, we need to get an emergency communications out today or this afternoon to our main point of contact with all our customers because we're about to be in the news tomorrow, could you get it out the door? Could you segment your audience for just the main point of contacts? Do you have the people in place, whoever has to hit the send button, assuming it gets written? And 67% of the people said they could do that. I mean, it should be 95%, but at least it's a little bit better than 47% was. So, there are, and the other piece of data that I learned was when I started comparing the people who said their scores were good versus scores were bad, if you just looked at the people who were good, they gave themselves a 4 or 5 on all the answers, there's a potential uplift of about 15%. So just by doing some of the things we're going to talk about today, some of them are simple, some of them are not, and it's a journey, it doesn't all get done in one day. Over the course of the year, you can go from a 47, which is a failing grade, to a 62%, which is a passing grade. The ideal is probably 75 to 80%, because you're not going to be perfect on everything, but to go to management and say, the sky's falling, we have a crisis, our customer contact database is horrible, and I learned this from the webinar you all had to talk about the survey. Nobody wants to hear that because that means resources. It means stop the press. It means money. To go to management and say, we just improved our open by cleaning up the database. We just improved our open rates by 10%. There are other things that we can do as well to improve the quality of our data. Let me show you a path to getting to 62%. Here are the 4 or 5 things we need to do. We've already showed you we can do this. We showed an impact. What else can we do without the sky's falling? You have to invest all these resources and stop the other part of what you're doing because you don't want to tell people to stop to fix something. It's like, let's fix it while the car is rolling.
So before we tackle how to make things better, let's step back a minute and talk about what are we talking about when we're saying customer data? Is it demographic, firmographic? Are we talking about contract data? What are we talking about here?
Yeah, I break it into 4 levels of database health. One is the simple eyeball stuff. Companies like OpenPrize and others who will clean it up. For example, do you have the first name is Doctor and the last name is Joseph because of the DR confused the system? Do you have an email in somebody's first name, confusing the situation? So the basic, just sweeping things up. But the where you get really important is 3 basic pieces of data, which is one is their current title. When you first met them 3 years ago and they filled out a form, they were a manager, and now they're a VP. So potentially they were a cross-sell candidate. Second is location. Maybe you assume everyone lives near the headquarters, or with COVID people have moved. So where do they live now? The field marketing team will know about that. Legal will know that you can be in compliance with state email privacy rules. And then do they still even work for the company? So the clients that I've worked for, all of the databases I've cleaned up, we found that 20% of the people are no longer employed by that company and they've gone to somewhere else. And we could talk about the implications of that down the road. So that's the basic information. Then what could you add into your CRM that would be really helpful? So from whoever's cleaning up the database, what would be really good to know, for example, is when was this field last cleaned up? Was it 3 months ago, or is it 4 years ago, or it's blank, it's never been cleaned up? So if I was responsible for cleaning up the database, I'd go to the CRM people and say, could you add a field under title, location, employer, last time we did an update on that? That would be the second level of cleanup. The third is integration with the product itself. When was the last time they logged in? When was the first time they logged in? What features have they used, depending on what you can pull off. The first one, the eyeball one, I call it silly. I don't think it's worth telling anybody that. But the titles, you could do that yourself. Go to LinkedIn and check it. It doesn't scale well if you've got 10,000 names. It's a problem. But that is something that is doable, or you could do a subset of folks and say, well, how bad is it? Let me just do 500 and see what it looks like. You don't need cooperation from anyone else. Obviously, when you get into adding fields in CRM, you need cooperation, and when you call into integration, you need more cooperation. But if you've done that hard work of cleaning up the database, then you've earned the right to go to somebody and say, look, I have fixed a problem. I'm not just asking you to, RevOps people, I'm not asking you to clean it all up. We've done level 1 work. Now can you help us with level 2? I think you get a much more open audience if you're willing to step up and do some of the work and show some of the benefits. So ever since we cleaned up the database, our open rates have gone up 10%. That's the easiest way to improve open rates is not subject line. The easiest way is to clean up the database. You will see a bump in the open rates.
Oh, for sure. I think another really important thing that you raised was that you're breaking this into levels. not all data is created equal. And what I always tried to encourage executives in particular to think about is like, what information, if we were lacking it, would be super embarrassing in a conversation with a customer? Table stakes, what did they buy? And then let's go from there. Let's talk a little bit about ownership now, because I know you said there's some things that you could go to and do. How do you think about who should own which portion of the data?
Yeah, so the research, this was the one surprising thing in the research survey that we've done. So I asked people who's responsible for the health and accuracy of the contact database. Most companies, anecdotally, people would say, oh, the CSMs, that's their job. They talk to the customers, they clean it up. The reality is that they might clean up that person they talk to every week or every month, but all the 15, 20, 30, 50 other users, they're not going to clean up. So it's really not the CSMs. Then you might say, well, RevOps does it. And, RevOps might clean up duplicates, but they're probably not going to go in there and add titles and location and things like that. So, which is why the database is not accurate. My theory is that the surprising piece of data I learned is that if CS owns the health of the database, they will do a 10% better job than if RevOps owns the database, as far as the title, location, employer, those sort of demographic type of data. Because they'll think about that a little bit more, whereas RevOps is much more into the duplicates and things like that. I'm simplifying it, but...
Yeah, and I think that may be symptomatic of where the titles are actually focused versus how they were intended to be implemented. Right. Yeah. So, like, the original concept, the pundits all throughout there is, wouldn't it be great if all the operations teams were unified so everything worked together seamlessly? Right. In actuality, that's rarely what we see put in place. There's more emphasis on sales. Sometimes marketing or customer success are rolled in. 50-50 on enablement and deal desk. It's kind of all over the place. I spent many years in customer success operations. I would agree with you that it benefits the company if you have somebody thinking about how can we scale mass cleanup for a good portion of the records. And then, yes, the CSM is ultimately going to own, if they see something, they should change something. Of course. Yeah. It's like being at the airport, right? Yeah. But would you agree with that? Like looking into, and my thought is like, let's look at enrichment. What's updated? And of course, there's complications to that, which we'll probably get into next. But would you agree with that?
My take is that if there is a CSOps group, that is the group of people who should be owning that accuracy of the database, because they're operations minded and they're aligned to the customers as opposed to the prospects. There's a group out there, which is the customer marketing people, who I think that the one way to pivot away from being a purely a customer advocacy person and moving towards lifecycle marketing is to start taking ownership of the health of the database. So if there's no CSOps, if I was in customer marketing at a company, I would start raising my hand and saying, let me start cleaning up the database, because I'm the one who needs to communicate with customers. I'm the one who's looking at the open rates. I'm the one looking at the various things. And let me take ownership of it. I'll work with RevOps. I'll work with the CS team. But let the buck stop with me, and I'll keep track of how are we doing. Are we at 70%, 80%, 90%? Clearly realizing that there's a certain subset of people, like your main point of contact, you probably like 99% accuracy. But the person who has a username password is never logged in, maybe you don't even worry about them. There's probably 70% of your customer contact database that you want to pay attention to. There's probably 30% that you don't, and that's okay. If somebody's never using your product, why are we trying to keep their data clean? CSOps would be number one if you have it. I would start thinking about customer marketing as the group that should own it, because RevOps has 100 other tasks as well, not just cleaning up the database.
It's not just one person on the team. Let's talk a little bit about what do we do to fix it? To me, one of the most important pieces of making this work and sustainable is knowing how to parse out all the different kinds of data and understanding what's important to attack first, second, third, etc., and how often you need to come back to it. Right. So to me, again, I go back to what's going to be embarrassing if we talk to a customer. For me, it's always contract data first. And then we want to figure out things like attrition. How do you think about ranking? What do we attack first? What's the biggest problem? What's the smallest?
Yeah, I just had coffee this morning with somebody who joined a large company that's a spin-off from a larger company. And she said she's been there 6 months. She still does not have the customer list because the customer list from the company that spun them off is all mashed together. Because I was asking about contacts. She said, well, I'm not there yet, Irwin. I still have to get the customer list. Once I get the customer list, then I'll start figuring out, well, who are the contacts at the account? So, there's a differentiation there. Is clearly the customer list is, has got to be clean with, when did they buy, what did they buy, when is their renewal date. You'd be amazed. I've talked to more companies than you could think that have trouble separating the two out.
I'm not amazed, unfortunately, but I view that as table stakes. If you don't have that, focus there first.
My guess is it's hard to tell, but it depends upon the product. Every customer probably has anywhere between 5 and 15 contacts that are related to that customer. Like Salesforce at a company might have 2,000 people who are users, but they probably have 7 or 8, 9 people that are their contact people within the organization, whatever roles they may have. So it's also seeing how many are we single threaded? That's another table stakes. How many contacts do we have for each customer? Well, the average is 3. That's a problem. That's an area where you go to the CSMs and saying, hey, here are 50 accounts that we only have 1 or 2 contacts. We got to get everyone else. The average is 5 or 6. We got to get 2 or 3 more contacts as people come and go, and promotions and all that. So that to me is another table stakes, and that starts getting you into the contact side of the house. And then it's like, how clean is it? If I was a customer marketing person, the first thing I would do to get a quick win is go and do an inventory of all the customer communications that the company sends out. The automated ones, like when you first get your username, password, what does that even look like? Because it was probably written 5 years ago by an engineer, and it probably doesn't look good and probably doesn't even meet the messaging, and it may not even make sense, but no one ever sees it, so no one ever looks at it. But I would do that complete inventory of what are we sending out, who is getting it, are we doing any segmentation, what's the open rate, who owns it, how does it get sent out? Because at my prior company, we had 3 different ways that emails would go out the door. Actually, 4 different ways that emails would go out the door. So where is this actually leaving the organization? Just to have that, I think that piece of paper shown to everybody would be, people would be blown away. It's like, we have 42 different types of communications that go out. Yeah, is there any coordination? Is there any air traffic control? Not really. That begins the conversation around customer communications. It would lead quickly to the health of the customer contact database. If I was in RevOps, I would probably take a group of maybe 400 customers, chosen at random, active users, inactive users, main point of contacts, whoever they are, but random as opposed to one segment. And get a summer intern or hire somebody and just see what's the quality of those 400 names. How many people do we have their right title, location, and the right employer? And it's like, oh my God, 30% of the people, we don't even have that. Now it's good enough as opposed to maybe not good enough. It's good enough. Now we have to think about maintenance because it'll start decaying, but where we're at now is okay. The sort of bare minimum of keeping that, once you do keep it clean and updating it, is probably every 6 months. I mean, you can buy tools. The bare minimum to cleaning up is every 6 months to refresh that with title, location, and employer. The other piece of data I learned, which was a little surprising, was that when I asked people, can you segment your audience by title, 53% said yes. C-levels, VP levels, that's relatively easy. When I asked them if they could segment by role, like who's the main point of contact, who's the admin, who's an active user, who's an inactive user, who's an advocate, how do they relate to your product, that only got to 36%. So that would be an area, to me, that's a little bit of low-hanging fruit, is let's start figuring out for some of these accounts, and again, you would start with a handful just to see what happens. Can we start identifying what their role is within the company? So it helps us do better and better segmentation. When I was at Forrester, the average email when I started went out to like 1,500 people, had a 18% open rate. By the time I left, the average email went out to about 800 people, and we went up to a 25% open rate. Just due to segmentation. It wasn't, nothing else. Because you'd rather send to less people who are more relevant than to a lot of people, and it's not relevant to them. So, but that's the journey, to take little bits at a time and assessing, like, is this good or is this bad? If it's bad, let's maybe fix it and see what the impact is. And that's why it's a year-long cycle. It's not going to get done in 3 months.
And for RevOps folks, anybody with an expansion and retention initiative happening in their company, this is crucial to making any of that work. And it can be hard to sell the executive on why this is so important. I think that's one of the skills really necessary in making all of this work, because just think about if you could flag to your CSM when their main point of contact is no longer at a company, that's hugely valuable in retaining the customer, figuring out who else is there, and then activating a save play. When we're looking at selling to executives, do you have any advice for folks out there?
Yeah, I think one is I would start with convening a group. Let's meet as a month. Somebody from RevOps, customer success, customer marketing, product team. Who are the big communicators to customers? 5, 6 people across the organization to meet on a monthly basis to look at some of the results of what we're seeing. So there's a group in place. It could be ad hoc, but there's a group in place starting to think about this from their different perspectives. Because when I talked earlier, 60% of the score was around cooperation and coordination among the various groups. That frankly should be 90%. It shouldn't be 60%.
Well, I doubt it's 60% if we're being honest too.
And so I would convene that group, because then it's not you going to management. It's a cross-functional group who thinks about this stuff, and we've got some challenges. It's not like stop the presses. We need to buy this technology. We need to hire 3 people. It's no. We on our own we did X. And we saw, an impact of Y, whatever that is. Our open rates went up, or we were able to segment the audience better. But now we've assessed the quality of the database. We've seen that we have this real problem with not keeping track of people who've left the company. Now we need to bring in a resource to either manually go through it, or talk to Irwin, or talk to a company who does this, and clean it up to get us to a steady state. And we have a process moving forward how to keep it clean, so we're not back at you in 6 months. So it's a incremental change, not a huge change that you're asking people to change the way we're doing business. We can still do our campaigns and renewal programs while this is happening, but it'll take some time. At the end of that period, we'll show you how much better it's gotten. That would be the advice to executives.
Yeah, and if I could throw in finding out who your biggest objector, who has the ear of the executive, and then selling them on it so they're no longer objecting, or they're a champion for the project. I had a scenario where the VP of sales didn't understand why resources should be diverted to this, but when I went through how bad the existing customer data was and the impact on understanding ideal customer profile and how we should design territories and which customers are churning and causing clawbacks, tune totally changed.
Right.
CEO got on board. Everything was okay. So figuring out who in the organization needs to be sold on it is.
Now, do you think that's the CRO or VP of sales? Is at the end of the day, is that the person?
Depends on the organization model and your CEO. I've had some CEOs who are super product friendly. I've had quite a few who are really joined at the hip with sales. And it's rarely been marketing or CS, unfortunately, in my experience. Hopefully, there's plenty of them out there, just not in my experience.
Right, yeah.
How about you?
Yeah, you got to learn how to read the political winds.
Yeah.
And I mean, you generally don't have the seat at the table, so it's a little hard to figure that out. It's probably not your boss. You probably want somebody in another part of the organization to be the internal champion for this.
So we're running at the end of time.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you really want to hit on and impart to people before we tell folks where to find you?
All the time I've been in customer marketing, I've never had somebody from demand gen or RevOps come to me and say, Irwin, what do you need? What can we do to make your job easier? What field can we add, or what process, whatever. It's always me sort of, and this is true of all my friends in customer marketing. They've got to bang on the door, and then they get swatted away. It's like, no, you don't need that field. Or we'll do it, but 6 months till you get it. And because that people don't want to hear like why the benefit of it, because they've got 100 other projects. I would beg my friends in RevOps or Demand Gen or CS Ops, talk to the customer marketing people, develop a relationship with them, because they're afraid of you, frankly. The customer marketing people are afraid of you because they know they're going to be told no. Just go to them and say, look, I'm not promising anything. Let me understand what you do. Let me spend some time. Then when you come to me, I'll at least have a context for it. The first conversation you don't want to have between customer marketing, RevOps, or anybody in the company, this is what I need. Like, I go to legal, I meet the people in legal when I join a company, just so I know who the names are and they know what I do. I'm not even asking for anything, I just want 20 minutes of your time. Because sometime next 3 months I'm going to be asking for something, and at least I know who you are. My one action item is go across the street to just understand what they're doing. They have challenges, they've got their own KPIs. You might hear like, oh, we're doing something just like it. We're already doing that, and they just don't know it. Or we're about to work on a project, we can slip that in. It's just another field. I know these things are connected and all that.
Oh yeah, it'll only take 5 minutes.
Yeah, no, I know. I get it.
No, I kid, but I would agree it's so important for RevOps folks to stay curious and ask why, because there may be another solution that's just as good, if not better, and there may be a really great reason that this is being asked for that impacts the rest of business. So that's a great point. Irwin, thanks so much for being on the show. Yeah. Where can people find you to network? Yeah, so the research port will be available at the Repetitos website, and so that'll be out, and they can reach out to me on LinkedIn. When it comes to cleaning up customer contact databases, sort of my differentiator is I'll do a one-off for you. So I work with data processors who will do a one-off cleanup, so you don't have to deal with a 6-month procurement cycle and all the work that takes to bring in some new technology. You don't have to sign a 1-year contract. We'll just clean it up once for you. And then you can decide, sign a contract with the data processor, do it yourself. There are 100 ways to clean it up, but come to me to do that first cleanup. It'll take 2 weeks. It'll be done, and it'll cost you pennies a name as opposed to 6 months of procurement and $15,000, $20,000, $30,000. So I think from a cost perspective, a one-off is the way to go.
Thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode, everybody.
For more great content like this, join our community at RevOpsCoop.com and check out the links provided in the show notes.
Keep it RevOpsAF, y'all.